Also tonight, Decision 2018. Bridgeport Mayor Joe Ganem's made a big deal out about the number of signatures he collected to get on the primary ballot, 32,000. But how many of those signatures actually counted? And where did he get most of his support? Political reporter Max Reiss has been investigating. He's here with the story. Max.
Jerry, over the past few days, we have done a lot of counting, a lot of tabulating. We want to tell you we likely had a few human error mistakes along the way, but what we found on the whole is that number one, Joe Ganem and his campaign collected a ton of signatures, and number two, about half of them didn't count.
We got on by a grassroots effort, 32,000 signatures. I'm proud of that.
Ganem has said even throughout his campaign, he is the people's candidate and has widespread support, even touting his overall collection figure of 32,000 during a recent debate.
But it was the power of the people, the grassroots effort.
And no one turned in more signatures than he did, even struggling to carry one box full of them. We spent about 2 days going through one by one all of the signatures his campaign collected. It's this conference room at the Secretary of the State's office where elections officials spend days counting signatures for numerous statewide and local candidates, a process that starts at the local level. We tagged along with Ganem back in May when he was collecting signatures to get on the ballot. He needed current registered Democrats, and the person collecting those signatures had to be a registered Democrat. Ganem admitted to us that he knew many of his petitions were likely to be disqualified for one reason or another.
If you're doing it basically with a volunteer effort, me, myself, getting many of them, you're going to get signatures with people that tell you they're registered Democrats, have been taken off the list, or think they're registered Democrats, or have a voting place somewhere else.
About 48% of all of his signatures, around 15,000, were thrown out by local registrars, leaving him with 16,929. That's about 1,500 more than what was necessary. Ganem's reliance on cities was remarkable. He received 87% of his qualifying signatures from Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford. In his home city of Bridgeport, Democrats there accounted for 40% of his signature haul. Overall, Ganem collected signatures from 25 of Connecticut's 169 municipalities.
What does that say? Is that really broad support, or is that city support for Joe Ganem?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is if you look at, we did spread out. You're going to go to where, if you're getting Democratic signatures, you want to go to the places where the most Democrats are. So you're going to go to there's 40,000 Democrats in Bridgeport, similar amount in New Haven.
For comparison, Republicans David Stemmerman and Bob Stefanowski also collected signatures, and their success rate was much higher. Their campaigns went door to door rather than very public places searching for registered Republicans. They also had to collect far fewer signatures since this state has far fewer registered Republicans. With the NBC Connecticut Investigates, I'm Max Reiss. Let's talk about your position in this race.
Yes.
Where you're polling is maybe around 10% in theory.
Sure.
Isn't it possible you're a spoiler?
The spoilers are 30 years of Democratic and Republican leadership.
You're saying they're the spoilers?
Absolutely, and they're going to ruin Monty's and my chance of getting 70% of the vote.
Has Ned Lamont asked you to drop out of the race?
Everybody wants us to drop out of the race.
Have they both reached out to you? Have Bob and Ned reached out to you?
Directly or indirectly, yes. I mean, that's all been part of, gee, would you have a conversation? He answers absolutely no. I didn't go into this, ask people to sign petitions, ask people to help fund the campaign and volunteer.
But who's a worse choice then, Ned Lamont or Bob Stefanowski, as far as you're concerned?
They're both. That's why I'm running. I mean, these questions are not asking the right question. The question is, Monty and I are providing a legitimate third option with meaningful experience that neither of those two candidates have. Neither of them know anything about the state of Connecticut from a political standpoint.
If you don't win and you end up with, let's call it...
We will win. Go ahead.
But if you don't and you end up with 100,000 people who voted for you, that's basically 10 percentage points. Let's say that's what it ends up being. Isn't it possible that everyone's going to wake up the next day and say Oz Griebel's the reason why my guy isn't the governor?
People get up in the morning. This is what I say to people. Don't vote for the lesser of two evils. Get up in the morning and have some spine. Vote for the people that you believe are the best ticket, not who's the less of two evils.
If you're going to cut the income tax, which you've been saying since day one, how do you then get that revenue from that growth you've described? How does that revenue then come back in and then fund all the different services the state provides?
Yeah, well, again, we've seen it time after time. If you lower the tax rate, in the medium term, tax revenues go up. The perfect example is the boat tax. They cut it in half this year. Boat sales went up from 1,000 to 3,000. More revenue came in. So we've been doing the exact opposite, Max, for 8 years, which is higher tax rates, and the revenue levels are coming down. We've got to do the reverse.
If the income tax would be phased out, because you're now saying it's going to be the second 2 years is when you're really looking at it, correct?
Yeah, I've said that all along. Yep.
If you're going to start phasing out a lot of that revenue, but then people aren't paying those taxes anymore, how do those things get funded?
Well, we're going to have more jobs. We're going to have a bigger tax base.
Right, but the taxes aren't getting collected, though, right?
Well, it's a gradual phase out over 8 years. We'll see how well this economy performs. We've got triggers every year. If the economy performs better than we think, we'll lower the tax rate more. If it doesn't, we'll lower it less. But the key, Max, is the first 2 years to cut costs. Spending in this state is absolutely out of control.
So we did a story on this. About 60% of the state's spending is etched in stone in some respect, whether it's pensions, other benefits, Medicaid, those different things. Could you tell me $10 million, $20 million that you think in waste that you've identified so far that you can say, yeah, we can absolutely look at that?
I'll give you $10 million right off the bat. Ned wants to put a new computer system into the DMV. They just did it 2 years ago for $25 million. He wants to spend another 20 to do it again. We should privatize the DMV. People are waiting in line 4 or 5 hours to get their license. How long are we going to give that entity to do it? You could privatize it, you could give the good employees there a job, and you can save money by doing it.
Do you know how much that would save off the top of your, because what Ned's proposing is something new, so that's not existing spending.
Yeah.
So do you know what you would save then from the DMV?
We need to look at it, but I guarantee you we can do it less cost for more service. I'll give you another example, the XL Center. We're going to put $20 million into that to fix it up in hopes that we can sell it in 2 years. I met with a group a couple weeks ago. They'd love to do a sale-leaseback where they fix it up. They make the investment, and then we share some of the gate receipts on the other side. We can turn the XL Center from a cost center into a profit center and generate revenue without any cost whatsoever.
Are you referring to the bonding that's already been allocated for it, the improvements for it?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's already gone to the bond market. So Wall Street has to get paid, don't they?
Yeah, but money's fungible.
In 59 days, the new General Assembly and governor will get to work on fixing our state's problems. This comes after months of nasty campaigning, lots of anger, and political division. The campaign is over, and governing will soon begin. When you're going up against one opponent for political office, you can just shout at each other all day long. Say just about whatever you want, and it doesn't matter. But on January 9th, it's time to do a lot more listening. I think most of the 1.4 million of you who voted last week wouldn't mind that.
You asked about salt, and one of my original platforms when I first started campaigning was to increase that salt deduction, because you hit that $10,000 right away because it's combined. My proposal is to $20,000.
But they cut it, though, with the tax cut, though. So if they cut it during the, you can't deduct as much as a result of state and local tax deduction change. So you're saying you want it to be higher now?
I want it double. Yeah, so because when you have deductions, $10,000,
but they cut that.
They're combined.
But Congress cut that.
But it's in his new, it is in his tax cuts and job plan.
Right, but people are going to be paying more because they can't deduct as much as they used to in states like New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and California.
But they're not going to be paying more because if you look at the overall plan, it balances out. But what voters are telling me is that they're complaining about that ceiling of $10,000, that it is not enough for them.
Right, which was a change in the federal tax code at the beginning of this year.
Right.
So you disagreed with that part of the federal tax code change?
I think that people should have the ability to deduct more.
Bob Stefanowski says in some cases, vaccination should be optional and parents should have the final say. Political reporter Max Reiss is here with this NBC Connecticut exclusive. Max.
Keisha, NBC Connecticut obtained the video of Stefanowski making those comments during a campaign event over the summer from a source working on Democratic campaigns here in Connecticut. We do not know what the candidate said before or after the vaccination discussion, but we now know the GOP nominee for governor is skeptical of the government making any demands of parents when it comes to vaccinating their children.
The grainy video was shot during a GOP primary stop in northeastern Connecticut. This was back when Stefanowski was in a field of 5 for governor. In it, he's answering questions from an audience member.
In general, I'm against the government telling you to do anything with your family.
Okay, so
you're usually wrong.
NBC Connecticut was able to trace the video back to an event with the Quiet Corner Tea Party on July 10th. Stefanowski posted photos from the event on Facebook, and so too did the Tea Party group. The video clip obtained by NBC Connecticut is 2 minutes long.
You know, it's going to come down to if your kid's not vaccinated, you can't go to a public school. Do you think the state should dictate that, or should local BOEs handle that?
I think it depends on the vaccination. I mean, you know, we shouldn't be dumping a lot of drugs into kids for no reason. And certainly if you want to homeschool your kid, you should be allowed to do it. And if you don't want to vaccinate your kid at home, you should be allowed to not vaccinate. So I think you got to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Later in the video, he says this.
I would look at it. I don't think we should be forcing people to inject a ton of chemicals into their kids, but I'd want to see more about it.
Stefanowski's campaign told NBC Connecticut, quote, Bob's position here is in line with the law. While he believes that the best practice is to vaccinate your children, he does not believe that the government should be able to legally force you to do so. Connecticut law requires 8 different immunizations before a student enters pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and 7th grade. They range from tetanus and whooping cough to hepatitis and meningitis. State colleges also have their own requirements if a student is planning to live in on-campus housing.
It can only increase the cultural dynamic that already exists, right? Clearly, Bob Stefanowski is going after culturally conservative voters.
Central Connecticut State political science instructor Gerald Duquette says the issue of vaccinations will not become a theme between now and Election Day, but says at the very least, this topic could drive out each party's base.
You're not really moving voters, right? And if you are, you're moving such a tiny marginal amount of voters that it's not worth it, right? It's like using a chainsaw to cut your steak.
Stefanowski also says in this video that he and his wife decided that immunizations were best for his 3 daughters and would not commit to any kind of hypothetical legislation relating to vaccines. Max Reiss, NBC Connecticut News. I'm going to go down a list of topics, yes or no, if you think they're going to get serious consideration. Not that you're good at predicting things.
Only football games.
Only football games. Are you going to talk about raising the minimum wage this session?
Yes.
Paid family leave?
Yes.
More criminal justice reforms?
Not sure.
Okay. Recreational use and regulation of marijuana?
Yes.
Sports betting?
Yes.
Tolls in some capacity?
Yes.
Cutting taxes?
Yes.
Do you think that everything I did there is what the mandate is from voters?
That's what we heard out in the doors.
What do you think is the Dan Malloy legacy that the general public sees? Not the one that's in your incredibly well-managed document you provided to us, but what do you think everybody else, long outside the governor's residence, is going to be saying about Dan Malloy?
You know, I think here's one positive note of appreciation. Even my strongest critics recognize that I outworked them. And that's not a bad thing. I enjoy work. I'm driven to get accomplishments made, and I'm driven to make sure that that's distributed on a fair and impartial basis.
Do you think that work and that work ethic got misinterpreted sometimes for something else?
You know, again, I don't know. I mean, I think people will categorize things, and some of those characterization, some of those things get built into a narrative over which an individual has no control.
Do you wish you had more control over it?
I don't spend time, you know, thinking about it, to tell you the truth. I mean, I think one of the differences between myself and other politicians is they want to be popular. I don't care. I just want to get things done.
While you were president of City Council, the city did rely in some respects on some one-time revenues. One thing that's been discussed many times is the agreement for the state to purchase a parking garage from the city, which was a $17 to $20 million transaction, but then that removed $14 million, but that also removed a revenue stream from the city of Hartford, and it also left a hole in the budget the next year because that purchase doesn't carry forward. How do you discuss, or at least justify, some of those decisions that were made while you were City Council President?
Sure.
And we'll start with this as a new topic, so I'll give you 2 minutes, Mr. Wooden.
Sure, and I'm glad you asked that question, right? Because this is the type of actual on-the-ground experience. You talk about one-time revenue sources. Of course, Every government, municipal, state government uses that. That's not sustainable.
But does that make it okay?
No. But of course it's okay if you're trying to make a budget work.
The biggest hammer over the head of Governor Dan Malloy during the fall election from Republicans was his economic record. Did he really destroy Connecticut like we saw in all those campaign ads and mailers? That's today's Face the Fact Check.
124,000 more people are working in Connecticut's private sector since Dan Malloy took office. The state's gross domestic product, the value of all the goods and services in the state, is bigger than it was when he started in 2011. Back then, it was $236 billion worth, and last year it was up to $264 billion. But that growth was very slow compared to the rest of the country. In 2011, there were 11 Fortune 500 companies with headquarters in Connecticut. Today, there are 17. When it comes to income, Connecticut falls behind much of the country. The median household income in the state has grown by about $2,000 since 2011, while nationwide, it's grown by double that, $4,000 on average. And finally, the state's unemployment rate was 9.3% when he started, and it will end somewhere in the range of 4.1% by the time Governor Malloy exits.
Should cities and towns be as dependent on the state government as they currently are? Or should there be some kind of a local revenue mechanism that they can use to raise their own money, to pay for their own programs?
We have a tax structure that we have no other choice. Our tax structure right now is based on
what I'm saying is,
ownership
should there
and
be
business.
a choice? That's what I'm asking you. Should there be an option?
I think the option is making sure that we have the option is making sure that we have fully funded programs through the state legislature and allocating funding for our municipalities.
But should the municipality be allowed to raise other money through other mechanisms besides the property tax? That's what I'm asking you. And not be as dependent on municipal aid.
Specifically on municipal aid. Well, that's a bigger
or
question.
ECS, or he says, no matter what, the money's coming from the state, whether it's ECS or municipal aid, however you want to slice it. But should those cities and towns, a sales tax, a local sales tax was floated about 1.5 years ago in the General Assembly, and it didn't go anywhere. Would you support a local sales tax to allow a playing field that lost $2 million to raise money on its own?
I will support a legislation by a group of people in collaboration with our next governor and make sure that we have the wiggle room and the breathing room for municipalities.
Now to the governor's race. Democrat Ned Lamont has touted his role in bringing the high-tech company Infosys to Connecticut.
But what he calls a corporate victory, his Republican rival Bob Stefanowski calls a bad deal. NBC Connecticut political reporter Max Reiss is here with more on that. Max.
Keisha, Jerry, a high-tech 21st century company like Infosys that provides IT operations, data, and artificial intelligence software sounds like a pretty good company for the state to land. But there are critics who don't believe what this company is selling.
Infosys calls itself a global leader in outsourcing, landing contracts with American firms and then taking their IT systems overseas, usually to India. That's something Craig D'Angelo experienced firsthand.
It's very difficult and very humiliating to go into work every day, be positive, knowing that you're going to lose your job, and still be upbeat and still do the training, and then 6 months later be walked out the door.
D'Angelo worked for 11 years in IT for what used to be Northeast Utilities, now Eversource. He trained workers both in India and here in the United States to replace him and some of his colleagues. Infosys has previously been hit with penalties in the tens of millions of dollars by the U.S. government for its use of H-1B visas, according to the U.S. Department of Justice.
Do you think that Infosys is not the kind of company that Connecticut should be excited about having?
No. I really don't.
Fast forward to today. Infosys tells NBC Connecticut it plans to hire 1,000 workers in Hartford by 2022. The state has guaranteed up to $14 million in incentives, but the Republican candidate for governor says those are not the jobs we want in the state.
They're taking over their jobs, and we're putting Connecticut people out of work.
This became an issue in the race for governor because Democratic candidate Ned Lamont is credited with helping to bring the company to the state. He had a previous professional relationship with Infosys executives. Lamont says any criticism of the deal is unfounded, even from people like Craig D'Angelo.
Is there a little bit of scar tissue that's maybe justified for some of those people where they had to train their replacements and now that company is right in their backyard?
No, Bob Stefanowski ran an outsourcing operation. Infosys is bringing jobs into Connecticut. These are Connecticut jobs, training Hartford people to make sure that the workforce at Travelers and Aetna and Hartford Health is modern and tech savvy. It's going to keep our businesses here and attract new businesses here. It's probably one of the most positive things happened to the city in a long time.
A spokesperson for Infosys tells me in a statement, quote, "We do not plan to fill any of these positions with H-1B visa holders. These positions will be filled by American workers and visa independent candidates." Economic development professionals also say landing Infosys is a win for the state and a huge boost for the city of Hartford.
Absolutely, and it came at a time when Connecticut was really desperate for a major win. And this Infosys selection of Connecticut, very significant.
But Bob Stefanowski, the Republican and former corporate executive running for governor, says Infosys' past tarnishes any positive impact in the future.
When you bring a company in like that and you pay them $14 million to come here, you would hope that it would create jobs for people in Connecticut. And that would be my focus. I don't think it was the focus of Ned when he brought it in.
The deal with Infosys is not yet finalized with the state, though state officials say they expect that to happen soon. Eversource, in a statement, described outsourcing as a way to streamline IT functions at a prudent cost and still partners with Infosys and other expert IT organizations. Max Reiss, NBC, Connecticut News. You mentioned your time in Simsbury, and your time as first selectwoman ended pretty abruptly there after a disagreement with the board. Should voters in the 5th District read into what happened there and the way that relationship ended?
You know, sometimes you have to step out to step up. You know, I think that what was really important to me at that time was, as a woman, they cut my salary in the middle of the night, didn't have a hearing. And for me to stay in the job and, you know, take half the pay would really send a message to women that we don't deserve to speak up. And it wasn't about the money. It was about the way that I was treated and the way that they treated women. And my daughter said, "Mom, if you don't quit, then you're embarrassing all women."
A woman did follow in your footsteps in Simsbury, though. Lisa Hevner, a woman, did. So when you're saying that it was a message to leave, so what kind of message then did Miss Lisa Hevner send by taking on the job? Because she's also a woman.
Yeah, so what happened was we had, what happened was the salary was supposed to be reduced at the end of the term. So the new first selectman who came into office had a different role and a different term.
Finally, let's talk about government transparency and access. In my career covering politics, I've worked with 5 different governors in 3 states. No one has been more accessible and open than Governor Dan Malloy. He answered every question. His staff usually told you where he was going to be, and if he didn't know the answer to a question, he or his staff would always get back to members of the press. Ned Lamont was incredibly open during the campaign, answering lots of questions and being available on a regular basis. But in his first full week as governor-elect, we saw 2 closed-door meetings, one with elected officials, the other with corporate executives. For those of us who cover him every day, we hope this is not a change of course, as he goes from candidate Lamont to Governor Lamont. Bob has this firm message of, I'm going to cut your taxes. We talk to people all the time, and they say, how can you put more money back in my pocket? Isn't he at least kind of getting to that in a way that maybe you're not?
Hold it. He's not cutting taxes. He said he's going to eliminate the income tax, eliminate the corporate income tax, eliminate 60% of our budget, and people don't believe it. None of the Republican candidates for governor in the last cycle, they said it was impossible. They said it's a fantasy. Most of the Republican leaders up in the legislature cannot be done without doing devastating harm to our cities and towns, cutting education. It's the wrong way to go. I'm going to bring down the property tax, reduce that. I'm not going to increase the income tax, I promise you that, but I'm going to do everything we can to hold our schools harmless so we can keep great education for our kids. That's how you get jobs back in the state.
Is it possible you will raise taxes? Would you raise taxes as governor of the state of Connecticut?
No, I have said I'm not going to raise the income tax rate. I'm not going to raise the sales tax rate. And I'm keeping to that. I'm going to reduce the property tax just enough so that these folks, these seniors who I met with today, can afford to live in decency and dignity right in their hometown.
But even if you try to reduce the property tax, doesn't that just lead to another hole in the multi-billion-dollar budget that we're trying to deal with in this state? Because if you cut another tax, no, why not?
Look, Bob Stefanowski has no idea how he'd get rid of that $11 billion hole he leaves in our budget.
Let's talk about how we vote here in Connecticut. Massachusetts voters have been casting ballots for nearly 2 weeks. By the time Tuesday rolls around, Vermonters will be at the end of their 45-day window to vote. And then there are other states where most, if not all, ballots are actually mailed in. So that begs the question, is Connecticut behind the times?
Connecticut's voting laws are kind of rigid and certainly not trend-setting. If you can't vote on Election Day, you have to apply for an absentee ballot with an acceptable excuse.
We're behind as far as innovative laws go.
Gail Alberta is a political science professor at Fairfield University, and she's been studying elections and political participation for years. She explains that Connecticut would be well served to become the 38th state to allow for some kind of early voting, just as a way to allow for options for voters. But, and this surprised me, early voting does not mean more robust turnout.
It actually helps those who are already able to vote just vote at an earlier point in time.
So if you're somebody, when you hear about Election Day, you know what the day is, you know who you want to vote for, it just makes it easier for that person. It's not
makes it more convenient.
It's not going to add to the number of people voting.
It generally doesn't, no. So you can either expand the electorate, which is kind of the sense of what we thought it was going to do, or you can just kind of shift around when people vote, and that's what early voting does.
Connecticut's Secretary of the State has proposed numerous reforms over the years. Early voting, allowing anyone to get an absentee ballot for any reason, and Election Day registration. But those early proposals never even got called in the state Senate. That's only been tied for 2 of the past 20 years. Martin Looney, the top member of that chamber, supports early voting efforts.
It's good to have polling places set up in every municipality, at least a few polling places strategically located in advance of the election, maybe a week before, maybe the weekend before, to allow people greater opportunity to vote within the sanctuary of the voting booth.
Alberta with Fairfield University says the model that increases access the most might sound crazy to some state residents. Exclusive mail-in voting.
Voters get their ballot, if they're registered, in the mail. They can fill it out at home, at their leisure. They throw the stamp on it, put it back in the mail, or they can drop it off at a predetermined location where they'll collect those ballots. That has shown to significantly increase turnout.
Based on current political conditions, which could change in a couple of days, that method of voting appears a long way off.
We have too many isolating factors in our society already. I think the communal act of a community coming out on Election Day and voting at a polling place in the neighborhood is an important part of our democracy, and I would not want to lose that.
But that doesn't fly in the face of trying to maximize participation, allowing the most people, the most time, the most ways to actually cast their ballot?
I don't think so. I think that that's why I support early voting, to allow people to come out to a polling place a week or so in advance and have plenty of opportunity to do that, in addition to the absentee balloting that we have now. But I would think it would not be a good thing to have entirely absentee ballot voting.
That early voting proposal I mentioned, it died in the past 2 legislative sessions. Most recently, it had to do with end-of-the-session politics as a budget agreement was being struck. Do you think that some of the unpopularity, though, whether justified or not, maybe got a little bit more steam, if you will, when you win re-election, you said you weren't going to raise taxes, and you did raise taxes?
What I said about taxes is that it would always be the last thing I would do, and it was always the last thing I did. But what I didn't do is borrow operating dollars, which was done by my predecessor to the tune of $922 million. I can go down the list of unpopulars, which are now popular. There was a guy who, actually the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor, said that the busway, Connecticut Fast Track, would be an albatross around my neck and I would not be reelected. Well, if an albatross is a system that meets a population target 20 years in advance, that's a usage target, 20 years in advance, and is now viewed around the country as an unbelievable success. If that's an albatross, I wish I had more.